Sometimes I think I must have been hallucinating.
Take him!
Manhunt is a third-person survival horror game featuring James Earl Cash, a death row inmate spared from lethal injection to play murder games for a mysterious director. Atmosphere. The world in which Manhunt is set is rife with abandonment and decay, a town surely left to rot. Society has abandoned it and now it's the playground to murderers, gangs and criminals. But it doesn't feel like anarchy, it feels like the whole thing is cleverly orchestrated by the director, and he pulls the strings and instructs you to kill for his disturbing pleasure, encouraging you to be more violent or stop hiding to slaughter more gang members because it gets him off. It's presented in a grimy snuff film VHS style, with all of the cutscenes looking like they were ripped straight from VCR footage of a spy cam. It's deeply disturbing in both its gruesome content and presentation, but it's also so nerve-wracking and the enemies are so unlikable and smug that it's almost enjoyable to see them come to such horrible ends, making Manhunt nearly impossible to look away from.
No time to get all tear.
The music that plays feels cold and dirty like everything else and really adds to the tension with its high suspense pieces and dramatic fight music. The stealth is where a great deal of the tension in the game comes from, lurking in the shadows and waiting for the opportune moment to strike the unsuspecting hunters and perform executions. The prolonged tension can sometimes be stressful as the enemy AI refuse to split up so you can pick them off. Strangely, I never felt weak in the game. It was always easy to get a weapon, and then it was just a matter of when I would get my chance to clear out the hunters. Whilst the gameplay doesn't really change, with it at its worst turning into a gunfight at its most different, the combat feels less like a case of survival and more like pest extermination. Whilst the game repeatedly takes away your weapons and asks you to work your way up from nothing, you remain the most dangerous thing in any area you're in. It's strangely empowering. Manhunt is dirty, unpleasant, sometimes overbearingly tense, and portrays a darker side to humanity that lurks beneath the surface, encouraging you to join in or die. That's one Harry Mason.
We'll make a slash star out of you yet.
Scares. The game doesn't offer a great deal in the way of scares. There's one or two scripted events with enemies jumping out and suddenly chasing you, but beyond that the game doesn't have any standard scares and relies on the intensity of the stealth and combat to carry it, which means your mileage may vary. Gunfights can mean a sudden death for cash, and running away from enemies after being discovered can be frightening as much as being spotted, but that's about it. The most intense situation is by far the battle with Pigsy at the end of the game, but this is still a just more intense variety of the regular combat. The game contains many things that are disgusting and grotesque, but it's rare that any of it could be considered scary. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. The soundtrack is supremely atmospheric and changes from area to area. It's a really dirty and disturbing selection of ambient pieces that consist of metallic sweeps and metal grinding to high-pitched synths, saw-like gurgling and electronic swirls, tape hiss, and then the sound of wind blowing. The parts of the music that aren't deeply haunting are often the kind of soundtrack you expect to hear over a murder, and layered over it is the heartbeat that comes in when things get tense. The voice acting is pretty great, but its clarity leaves a bit to be desired. The director is meant to be over an earpiece, but some of the other enemies you encounter don't sound very clear, but you could argue that's because a lot of the enemies wear masks. Aside from the director, it takes a perverse pleasure in the things that transpires. The things the hunters say range from disturbing to deranged, with the grunting and incoherent ranting of the mentally unstable, to the faux confidence and boasting of the white supremacists, all of which promise death for cash, but all of them fail to deliver. The sound effects aren't very high quality, but knocking against surfaces is realistic enough against all terrain, and the rest of the sound effects are pretty standard except for the item pickups, which all have a low, haunting chime sound effect that I really like. The directional audio is extremely on point and lets you pinpoint enemy locations usually by sound alone, which is extremely useful in a game like this. Manhunt's soundtrack probably could have won this point alone. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. Manhunt's gore is by far some of the most disturbing gore in video game history, both deeply unpleasant and disturbingly realistic, from the now iconic plastic bag to garroting someone with a wire, to blowing a giant hole in someone's head with a shotgun. The game has a lot of weapons and much room for creativity. Blood splatters across the camera lens with each execution, and with multiple executions available per weapon, it invokes a morbid curiosity to see them all. Cash can decapitate enemy heads and throw them as a distraction, and it's again disturbing to see the plastic bag-covered head hanging from his belt like it was nothing at all. The graphics have aged since 2004, and the game may have lost a bit of its bite, but it's still enough to stand out thanks to the sheer unpleasantness of what you're doing. That's 3 Harry Masons.
Must understand, Cash. I could never let them go. Where were your family when you were facing your final moments in the chamber anyway? You've left your old life, your old self behind. I'm all the family you need now.
Story. James L. Cash is saved from death row to take part in a game of murdering gang members and convicts on CCTV for the enjoyment of the director. There's not much in the way of story, with each new stage just being a progression of gameplay from the last, and most of the characters being completely two-dimensional scumbags or degenerates. The only plot turns come when the director betrays you and the game becomes a revenge story. There's some silly moments where Cash gets away a shocking number of times from people who could have killed him easily, and the main antagonist of the game, called Mr. Nasty, isn't even mentioned in the game and only referenced in the manual. The story, again, isn't the main focus of the game, but there are a lot of things that could have been improved on. In the family saving sections, it would have been more impactful for the player if they knew who the family were, instead of just nameless NPCs to save as part of the gameplay, for example. Making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. Manhunt is a controversial game. It's dark and atmospheric, moody and grim, and whilst it's not traditionally scary, its deliberate desensitization of murder and the way it invokes that morbid curiosity in the player to explore unique ways to kill people is more impactful than any jump scare could hope to be. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I threw a lot of severed heads, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching, and always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace. That was really well done. I did that very fast.